Wales pledged herself to serve her country and her people, and to maintain the precious principles of constitutional government which lie at the heart of our nation. She set an example of selfless duty, a different future full of hope for all people.
No one expected this. Not from King Charles, not now, and certainly not in words this direct. What began as a routine royal address instantly detonated into one of the most explosive power shifts the British monarchy has seen in decades. When King Charles stood before the nation and spoke of duty, service, and the future, insiders knew something was coming, but no one was prepared for the name he would elevate or the role he would quietly dismantle. She will lead now. That single phrase sent shockwaves through palace corridors. In a carefully framed but unmistakably deliberate speech, King Charles placed Catherine, Princess of Wales, at the very center of royal authority. Not symbolically, not eventually, now. Behind the polished language and constitutional phrasing was a stunning reality. Catherine has been entrusted with operational control over key royal decisions, positioning her as the guiding force behind the throne. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla's influence, once assumed untouchable, has been dramatically reduced. Royal watchers immediately noticed the shift in tone. This wasn't praise, this wasn't encouragement, this was a transfer of power. The palace statement emphasized Catherine's example of selfless duty and her commitment to constitutional principles, language historically reserved for monarchs in waiting. Insiders say this was no accident. It was a message to the public, to Parliament, and to the royal household itself that the future of the monarchy is no longer theoretical. It has a face, and it's Catherine's. Behind closed doors, aides describe the moment as a quiet earthquake. King Charles remains king in title, but Catherine now holds the steering wheel when it comes to public strategy, global image, and long-term royal planning. From international engagements to messaging during political turbulence, she is now the final filter. The decision comes amid mounting pressures, Charles's health concerns, global instability, and growing public demand for a modern, relatable monarchy. And Catherine fits that role perfectly. If you're already sensing that this is bigger than a promotion, you're right. This is a recalibration of power, one that subtly sidelines Camilla. While she retains the title of Queen Consort, her authority has been reduced to ceremonial appearances and patronages. No strategic oversight, no internal decision-making power, just visibility without control. And yes, insiders confirm Camilla was informed after the decision had already been finalized. As one senior palace source bluntly put it, this wasn't about punishment, it was about survival. The public reaction was instant and electric. Support flooded in for Catherine, with social media exploding in praise for what many are calling the rise of a people's leader. Others expressed sympathy for Camilla, acknowledging her years of service, but even they admit the monarchy is making a calculated move. And this is only the beginning, because what King Charles didn't say out loud may be even more powerful than what he did. And once you hear what Catherine has already been preparing behind the scenes, this shift will make chilling sense. If you want the real story the palace won't spell out, make sure you're subscribed, because the next section changes everything. The palace statement landed like a thunderclap because it confirmed what insiders had been whispering for months, that Catherine's influence had already stretched far beyond ribbon cuttings and carefully staged smiles. Behind closed doors, she had been attending briefings once reserved for senior courtiers, sitting in on discussions about diplomatic optics, media strategy, and even internal family boundaries. This was not ceremonial babysitting of the monarchy. It was operational control. Staff describe meetings where Catherine asked pointed questions, challenged outdated assumptions, and quietly redirected plans that risked public backlash. The shift did not happen overnight. It was the result of years of consistency, trust building, and a public image that never cracked under pressure. King Charles, facing the reality of age and illness, has reportedly grown less interested in daily firefighting and more focused on legacy. That is where Catherine stepped in. Sources say he saw in her something rare, a figure who could calm the noise without inflaming it. While Camilla handled visible duties, Catherine was learning how the machinery actually worked. She studied briefing papers late into the night, requested historical precedents, and leaned on constitutional advisors to understand where influence could be exercised without crossing dangerous lines. This careful preparation made Charles confident enough to formalize what was already happening informally. The contrast between Catherine and Camilla could not be starker in the public imagination. Camilla's journey has always been burdened by history, emotion, and unresolved public resentment. Catherine, by comparison, arrived without scandal and built her reputation brick by brick. Polling data shared internally showed a clear pattern. Public trust surged when Catherine fronted initiatives, while controversy followed when Camilla became the focus. In an era where perception equals power, those numbers mattered. Charles is said to have reviewed them personally before approving the reallocation of authority. The contrast between Catherine and Camilla could not be starker in the public imagination. Camilla's journey has always been burdened by history, emotion, and unresolved public resentment. Catherine, by comparison, arrived without scandal and built her reputation brick by brick. Polling data shared internally showed a clear pattern. Public trust surged when Catherine fronted initiatives, while controversy followed when Camilla became the focus. In an era where perception equals power, those numbers mattered. Charles is said to have reviewed them personally before approving the reallocation of authority. What truly stunned palace veterans was the speed of the transition. Once the decision was made, it moved fast. Schedules were rewritten, advisory chains were adjusted, certain charities were quietly reassigned. Camilla was informed privately, without ceremony, and with language that emphasized necessity rather than blame. Insiders described the meeting as polite but final. There was no argument, only a long silence and a clear understanding that the ground had shifted. Catherine, aware of the sensitivity, reportedly insisted on restraint. No victory lap, no public display of dominance. Her approach has been to lead without spectacle, allowing the narrative to catch up slowly. Yet the message was unmistakable. The center of gravity inside the palace has moved. Decisions now flow through a different set of eyes, guided by a woman who understands that modern monarchy survives not through command, but through credibility, timing, and emotional intelligence. For observers watching closely, this moment marks not cruelty or revenge, but succession by competence, a recalibration designed to steady the crown, reassure the public, and signal that the future will be managed deliberately, patiently, and without the chaos that once haunted royal headlines during unpredictable global shifts ahead for the institution itself. Behind the scenes, Catherine's expanded authority didn't materialize overnight. Palace insiders say this shift has been quietly unfolding for years, hidden beneath carefully staged smiles and controlled optics. While Camilla appeared front and center at official engagements, Catherine was increasingly present in private briefings, strategic discussions, and long-range planning meetings that once excluded anyone outside the monarch himself. Advisors noticed it first. Invitations began arriving in Catherine's name. Briefing papers were revised after her feedback. Decisions were delayed until she weighed in. Slowly, unmistakably, the balance of influence changed. Those close to King Charles reveal that his recent health battles accelerated what had already been in motion. Facing mortality forces clarity, and Charles reportedly became determined to safeguard the monarchy's future while he still could. In Catherine, he saw stability without ego, popularity without recklessness, and authority without arrogance. Where Camilla often polarized public opinion, Catherine unified it. Polls consistently placed her as the most trusted royal, admired across generations and political divides. For a monarch increasingly aware of public sentiment, that distinction mattered more than tradition. Private conversations between Charles and senior courtiers grew more urgent in tone. The monarchy could not afford another reputational fracture. With global skepticism toward institutions rising, the crown needed a figure who embodied continuity while projecting renewal. Catherine fit that role perfectly. Her calm presence during national crises, her measured responses to media storms, and her refusal to weaponize personal grievance stood in stark contrast to past royal controversies. One advisor summarized it bluntly: "She doesn't chase power. Power follows her." Camilla's demotion, while dramatic, was framed internally as a structural necessity rather than a personal rebuke. Still, those close to her admit the shift was painful. For years, she had worked to rehabilitate her public image, slowly earning acceptance through consistency and restraint. Yet acceptance never became affection, and Charles could not ignore that distinction. In a monarchy dependent on emotional connection, affection is currency. Catherine has it in abundance. The transition itself was handled with surgical precision. There was no public confrontation, no dramatic announcement stripping Camilla of titles. Instead, responsibilities were reassigned quietly. Committees were restructured. Patronages were redistributed. Media briefings subtly emphasized Catherine's leadership while describing Camilla's role as supportive. The message was unmistakable, even without being spoken aloud. What shocked observers most was Catherine's response. There was no visible triumph, no shift in demeanor. She continued her engagements as usual, focused, composed, deliberate. Insiders say she insisted on maintaining respect toward Camilla, refusing to allow internal divisions to spill into public view. That restraint only strengthened her position. Power, when exercised without spectacle, appears inevitable. If you're noticing how quickly this royal narrative is changing, you're not alone. Stories like this evolve fast, and details disappear just as quickly. That's why staying subscribed and keeping notifications on matters now more than ever. As Catherine steps deeper into this role, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't a temporary adjustment. It's a recalibration of the monarchy itself, and it's only just beginning. The ripple effects inside palace walls have been impossible to contain, and by the time Catherine's expanded authority quietly took shape, everyone from senior courtiers to junior aides understood this was no symbolic gesture. Meetings once chaired by Camilla's office were now being redirected. Briefing papers were revised under Catherine's guidance, and long-standing protocols were suddenly open for reassessment. Insiders describe a noticeable shift in tone, less deference to tradition for its own sake, more emphasis on relevance, clarity, and public trust. Catherine's fingerprints began appearing everywhere, from the pacing of royal tours to the messaging around sensitive political moments. Those who work closely with her say she listens more than she speaks, but when she does, the room falls silent. Decisions are firm, measured, and framed around long-term stability rather than short-term optics, a contrast that has not gone unnoticed. Behind the scenes, Camilla's adjustment has been described as restrained but deeply emotional. Friends say she felt blindsided not by the loss of visibility, but by the sudden erosion of influence she had spent years building. While she continues her patronages with practiced composure, invitations to strategy sessions have thinned, and her advisors now operate on the periphery. This rebalancing has fueled whispers of resentment among Camilla's loyalists, some of whom privately question whether loyalty to Charles has been quietly rewarded with erasure. Yet Catherine has reportedly made deliberate efforts to avoid public humiliation, ensuring Camilla's appearances remain dignified, carefully framed to avoid open confrontation. The power shift is real, but it is being executed with surgical precision. Public reaction has only reinforced the palace's gamble. Polling shows Catherine's approval ratings soaring as commentators frame her rise as a return to values many believe were embodied by the late Queen Elizabeth II. Calm, consistency, and a visible sense of duty have become Catherine's defining traits, and audiences respond to that reassurance during uncertain times. Social media buzzes with comparisons, some calling her the steady hand the monarchy has been waiting for. Others see something more calculated, a modern leader skilled at navigating perception without appearing manipulative. Either way, the narrative has momentum, and the palace is no longer resisting it. What makes this moment particularly explosive is its timing. With global tensions rising and Charles increasingly conscious of his physical limits, the monarchy appears to be entering a transitional phase without formally acknowledging it. Catherine's expanded role functions almost like a rehearsal, allowing the institution to adapt before any constitutional shift becomes unavoidable. Courtiers quietly admit this is about continuity, not drama, even if the optics suggest otherwise. Still, the emotional undercurrents cannot be ignored. Families do not reshuffle power without consequences, and the Windsor household is no exception. Lines have been redrawn, loyalties tested, and expectations reset, all under the watchful gaze of a public hungry for meaning. And just beneath the surface, one question continues to grow louder. If Catherine is leading now, what comes next? What happens next is where this story truly cements itself as one of the most dramatic turning points in modern royal history. With Catherine now effectively operating as the monarchy's quiet center of gravity, insiders say the internal rhythm of palace life has already begun to change. Meetings once routed through multiple advisors are now streamlined, with Catherine's input carrying decisive weight. Courtiers describe a calm authority settling over key decisions, from overseas tours to crisis messaging, the kind of steady leadership that reassures both the institution and the public. This is not power worn loudly, but power exercised with precision. And that, according to senior aides, is exactly why King Charles made his move now. Behind closed doors, the message is clear. The monarchy is preparing for longevity, not nostalgia. Catherine's expanded influence is being framed internally as a rehearsal for the future, a living transition rather than a sudden handover. Her role allows King Charles to conserve strength while ensuring continuity, and it gives Prince William a trusted partner already operating at the highest level. Observers note that this triangle of Charles, William, and Catherine is now the true engine of royal strategy, a dynamic that subtly sidelines older structures without formally dismantling them. It is evolution without upheaval, and that makes it all the more powerful. For Queen Camilla, the coming months are expected to be quietly difficult. While palace statements emphasize unity and mutual respect, sources acknowledge a period of adjustment as she redefines her identity within a slimmer, more future-facing monarchy. Her public schedule remains intact, but her absence from strategic decision-making is unmistakable. Sympathetic voices argue that history has placed her in an unfair position, while others see this as an inevitable recalibration driven by public trust. Either way, the contrast is impossible to ignore. Where Camilla's role now looks contained, Catherine's appears expansive, forward-looking, and quietly commanding. Public reaction continues to surge, with Catherine's name dominating headlines and timelines across the globe. Polling suggests a sharp rise in confidence toward the monarchy, particularly among younger audiences who see her as relatable yet resolute. Analysts point out that this shift is not accidental. Catherine represents stability without stiffness, tradition without detachment. Her rise answers a deeper cultural demand for leadership that feels human, especially in uncertain times. If you're noticing how quickly the narrative has turned, you're not alone, and this is exactly why so many insiders believe this moment will be studied for decades. What makes this chapter especially compelling is its restraint. There was no coronation, no dramatic decree, no public confrontation, just a speech, a recalibration of roles, and a woman stepping forward while others stepped back. That subtlety is its genius, and as whispers grow louder about what Catherine may take on next, from expanded Commonwealth diplomacy to reshaping royal philanthropy, one thing is undeniable. The center of gravity has shifted. The crown still rests on King Charles's head, but the future is being shaped elsewhere, in steady hands that are no longer waiting in the wings. If this is the beginning, the monarchy's next chapter may be its most transformative yet, and the world is watching every move.